Since today I'm going to be talking about a zoo-themed board game, I wanted to make some awesome artwork. The only problem is, I didn't finish. All I have is a rough draft. Hi, my name is Ben. Today I'm going to be talking about New York Zoo by Uwe Rosenbug. Now, I'm going to talk about how the game is played and my thoughts about it at large, but I'm going to be giving a specific focus on how the game is played with children, especially young children. I have two girls, age 4 and 6, and both of them are able to understand and engage this game, which is why, as a board games with dad game, it's extremely well qualified. No, but seriously, 2 can play this game. And 3 and 4 and 5, and there's a solitaire version, but I know what you're thinking. Enough with the dad jokes. Let's set aside the puns and finally address the elephant in the room. Oh, see? There it is.
The purpose of the game is to fully develop a zoo by being the first to fully cover your zoo board with enclosures and attraction tiles. Strategically acquiring and breeding animals will help you do this faster. Set up, the common playing space looks like this, with 3 zoo tiles in each space. The tiles are sorted and stacked from light green to dark green, which helps large tiles come out early in the game and small tiles come out later. There are also animal acquisition spaces, and there are brown areas that aren't spaces but trigger animal breeding when they are crossed by any player. Empty spaces also don't count as spaces. During the game, if a board looks like this and I can move 1 to 4 spaces, that means I could move 1, 2, 3, or 4. Each player has a board, and every board is different depending on the number of players and the player order. This helps keep the game balanced and compensate for the starting player advantage. These are called zoo houses, and each of the houses can contain 1 animal, and this is the zoo board where you're going to be placing your enclosure tiles. Also on the player board is a reminder for a few of the rules. It tells you how far you can move on your turn, what to do when you breed, and a reminder for what to do whenever you place an animal in an enclosure. This brings me to my first criticism of the game. This area is not adequate to remind the player of all the rules. Personally, I feel that if you're going to have a player guide, it needs to describe everything you can do on your turn. Otherwise, you face the challenge of remembering what else you can do and what you can't do. This guide is truly terrible, so while I would usually refer to the guide to teach the rules, in this case, I'm going to ask you to ignore this while I try to do a better job. And, by the way, at the end of this video and in this description, I have a link to a graphic that I think is an improvement on the player guide, which you might find useful if you want to print it out and use it to help your own kids learn the rules effectively. The boards are passed out in numerical order, and the player with board number 1 goes first. During her turn, she can move the elephant 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 spaces. This is the one thing that the player board does well. The top corner tells you how many spaces you can move, and that varies based on how many players there are. Keep in mind that you will skip spaces that have been emptied. As mentioned earlier, there are 2 types of spaces: enclosure tiles or animal acquisition. If you use your turn to take an enclosure tile, you must also take 1 or 2 animals of the same type from anywhere on your board to live in the enclosure.
You have to put an animal in it right away.
Yes, you do.
You may not leave another enclosure empty by doing this. However, this does not mean enclosures can never be empty. It is possible to empty enclosures during the game, and you will find out how shortly. If you don't have an animal, or you can't move an animal without leaving an enclosure empty, then you may not take this action and you must take animal acquisition. When you land on an animal acquisition space, you may either take the 2 animals shown or 1 animal of your choice and place it in your zoo. They can go in a house, an enclosure with animals of the same type, or an empty enclosure. One of the side effects of doing this, and in fact, whenever you add an animal into an enclosure, you can always move an animal of the same type from one of your houses into the enclosure as well. This is a critical tactic for getting animals out of houses and into enclosures. Also, you may not store toast in an enclosure. The animals are penguins, flamingos, Arctic foxes, meerkats, and kangaroos. None are bred in captivity. After completing your action, it's possible that an enclosure will be completely full. This is when you empty an enclosure. Take all of the animals off, put them back in the supply, but keep 1 and put it in a house. If all of your houses are full, even the last animal gets thrown into the supply. My wife actually manages her zoo enclosures very effectively, which I enjoy because it's reminiscent of the day we met. I knew she was a keeper. As a reward for filling an enclosure, you may immediately take an attraction of your choice. Attractions are the only way to fill small spaces in your zoo board, so you cannot neglect them, and the strategy of managing your animals is all the more important in order to complete the game by filling every single square. There are also a few large attraction tiles, which creates an incentive to be the first to fill an enclosure. At the end of your turn, you can see if an animal breeding line was passed. If it was, then every player may breed one or two of the animals in different enclosures that match the animal crossed. By breeding, we mean that if an enclosure has more than one animal of that type, you may add exactly one more animal to that enclosure, as well as exercising the benefit of taking one of the animals from a house and moving it into the same enclosure. In a 2 or 3 player game, whenever you breed, you can repeat the event one more time with exactly one other enclosure. After breeding, it is again possible to have completed an enclosure, but this time it may have happened simultaneously for multiple players. In that case, players select their attraction in player order, beginning with the player whose turn was just taken. By the way, when it comes to the bonus breeding, as they call it, here the rules have a few special cases. For example, there's turn order when multiple people are doing things at the same time, or how the remaining animal from one enclosure can be chained to the bonus breeding to make effective combos. These are all exceptional cases and interesting for highly competitive play, but when I play with my kids, no one really cares about special cases in turn order. We, the parents, say, "You got a baby penguin," and then the family just celebrates the new birth. In fact, we usually play this as a 4-player game without bonus breeding, but when I did play a 3-player game with my kids, I found the bonus breeding overwhelmingly complex, and the next time I would definitely consider just leaving out bonus breeding entirely. The winner is the first person to fill the entire zoo board, and second and third place can be determined by the fewest number of remaining spaces, with ties going to the person with the most animals. There is a solitaire version, but I won't be talking about that in this video. That being said, let's look at the player board, the part of it that I told you to ignore. As I mentioned earlier, this part is good. It tells you how many spaces you can move based on the number of people playing the game. This part represents breeding, and it's a good graphic, except breeding happens after your action. So reading from left to right, this is misleading. This is a reminder that whenever you place an animal, you can take another from the houses. That can happen when you're either taking animal acquisition or breeding. To improve the game, especially for kids, I would use this player guide. Here you can read it left to right, move, take a tile or animals and follow placement rules, check for completed tiles and take an attraction as needed, breed, and then check for completion and take an attraction tile as needed.
Final thoughts on the game. So I'm going to break this down into 2 parts. How is the game as a family game, and how is it as a standalone board game, or if you're just playing with adults among hobbyists? How is the game? And as you're about to find out, my opinion in these 2 contexts differs. First, as a family game, I absolutely love this. It's amazing to have a game that is challenging and interesting and engaging for me, that I can have fun with it, but also my kids can really get on board and feel like they have a strategy that they can latch on to. I know my 6-year-old understands the entire game. Like, she can strategize through it. The game says 10 and up, and it's not a problem for her at all. My 4-year-old struggles a little bit more with the spacing, especially. One of the accommodations that we make for her is we just allow her to shift her pieces around on her zoo board as she plays. And she really likes making the animal babies. So she's having fun with us. I really like just having that experience with my kids, and I like that it's a challenge for them, where even for KK, the youngest one, even though strategically she can't prepare for one turn ahead, what she does do is, as pieces go outside of her limited area, she will readjust them to get them to fit. And she will just keep moving things around until she gets her zoo pieces back in alignment. And during the course of the game, she's either nudging it, or she's just like not satisfied with it, and she readjusts it many times, which I think is very good for her spatial development. Now, as a standalone board game, I can't say that I think it's very innovative Unfortunately, I'm familiar with other games by Uwe Rosenbug, and it kind of feels like he was thinking about releasing something new, and he said, well, you know, what's selling these days? Everybody likes baby animals. Maybe I can put baby animals on a game. Oh, patchwork. Because that's what the game is. It's baby animals on patchwork. And, patchwork, I guess, is a 2-player game, and this one is 1 to 5 player. I guess there's that aspect of it. But like there's definitely this aspect. I want to see something more. I would say in terms of rating it's very average. 5 in mechanics, 5 in strategy, 5 in luck. Probably like a 3 in complexity, which is good because sometimes you want a game that's not very complex. But for theme, it's low. I'd probably say a 2. And the only reason I would give it a score that high, again, this is a 10-point scale. The only reason I would give it a score of 2 is because at least when you have baby animals, it takes 2 parents to make a baby animal. So there's that. But it really just feels like the theme is slapped on. Also, in terms of gameplay, this is a game where you're doing your best to plan ahead and you want to make contingency plans. And so it can be very strategic, but it feels like there's not enough control for the task that you have to complete. Now, having the animals and getting the bonus tile or the attraction tiles really helps you to fill out the whole zoo board, but there are so many factors. Now, maybe in a 2-player game, you can kind of pay attention to what your opponent's doing and like use that so you know, okay, well, if I jump 4 spaces ahead, I'll pass the piece that they need to finish and kind of be offensive in that regard. But in a 3, 4, 5-player game, by the time it goes around and it's your turn again, the board that you're going to be left with is going to be pretty much random at that point. Like you're not going to, you can't plan 5 moves ahead in this game. And so that can be kind of frustrating. Maybe too much luck, but like the illusion that you should be able to do more. It does feel like you are basically just doing the same thing over and over again. So it's that kind of game where you're like, wait, whose turn is it again? Hey, it's your turn, play your turn. And it doesn't really have a dynamic changing momentum to it. You're just, taking zoo tiles, putting animals on them, and doing that over and over again. Now, the components are delightful. The game is beautiful. It's actually a lot of fun to do the same thing over and over again when it looks so nice. But, I gotta say, if it wasn't for how attractive the components are, we probably never would have bought it. In fact, my wife bought this game, which I think is a credit to the game. She bought it, though, because of the flamingos. Well, I highly recommend it as a family game, not so much as a game without kids involved. If you're interested in it, go ahead and check it out on theperfectboardgame.com, where all of these ratings are there. You can actually modify those ratings, and you can download the resources that I'll leave you, which is the player guide and other things. If you like this video, though, do subscribe, because this is actually the first episode of my entire channel. And if it goes well, I definitely want to do more board game reviews targeting families. So let me know what you think in the comments below. And thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
You can choose what animal, or you could just get both animals. Like, you could get this and this. And then, if you wanted, you could drag your 2 kangaroos into this.